with the new year, the new decade, and what the new generation of consoles is going to bring to the table, I believe it is quite plausible that the idea of a console killer PC will not survive the 2020s. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style for Saturday, January 4th, 2020. Let's start the show.
257. MultimediaJay Radio Style.
So with the arrival of the 2020s, it's a new year and it's a new decade, and for me, that means changes. I have various plans for various changes, even as early as this year in 2020, that I'll be aggressively pursuing. And one of them is me completely getting away from the possibility or the idea of building a console killer PC and encouraging people to do likewise. If not now, definitely in the next generation of consoles, building a console killer PC is going to be a stupid idea and you shouldn't do it. I've mostly thought about the possibility of building a console killer PC in two major forms. One of them is by taking one of my systems or building a new system and turning it sideways, in a case similar to this one that we're currently looking at in the picture for today. Basically a souped up picture of a Silverstone Grandia. This is an HTPC case that can take a full-size ATX motherboard and basically turn the system into a horizontal system with 120mm fans. The problem here is that the vertical nature of PC towers helps with the cooling and heat rises and being able to blow all the hot air directly out of where it's going to be found the most in a case up at the top. So there have been some variants of how PC cases are put together that have tried to play nice with the laws of physics versus a horizontal box. And if you look at even on the console side of things, a horizontal system that lays flat has been a liability before, such as with the Xbox 360 and the Red Ring of Death, and the issue at the time being that the technology that was getting crammed into that little box was just generating way too much heat for the box that it was getting crammed into. But in terms of console killer PCs, the two ways in which I've explored this idea is building what I called a J station in a horizontal enclosure similar to this, or buying a Raven Ridge laptop to see how much of a console killer a Raven Ridge laptop would be with an AMD Ryzen APU in it. Neither idea really sounds like a good idea anymore, especially with what's in development with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. If it isn't already, in this coming decade, the idea of building a console killer PC is going to be a stupid idea, and you shouldn't do it. And quite frankly, I think that anybody who wants to build a console killer PC is probably not going to end up sticking rigidly to the plan, and they're going to build something more akin to the sort of gaming PC they should have built in the first place. Because when you really think about what you're supposed to do when you build a console killer PC, ultimately, the only reason to build a console killer PC is to be able to make YouTube videos bragging about how you built a console killer PC. Otherwise, you're just building a regular gaming PC. So let's dig into what exactly the problem is and how the idea of a console killer PC is fundamentally flawed. Fundamentally, a console killer PC is an entry-level gaming PC that has just enough punch in its hardware to make having a console not worth it. So it's just enough hardware to get better performance than the consoles, and just enough hardware to deliver similar performance to the consoles at a more competitive price. With what I'm hearing about the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, it looks like console manufacturers are taking notice of what exactly they have to do, particularly in an environment where the Nintendo Switch basically owns the low end in terms of a device that's not as powered because it's partially a portable device and is being carried to some extent by strong first parties that Nintendo has, but Microsoft and Sony don't have at least as much. So what I'm seeing with the consoles is consoles moving away from one of their core advantages that I've seen over the years. Previously, when I talked about console versus PC, I would have talked about consoles selling for two reasons: their price and their simplicity. Consoles were always significantly less expensive than gaming PCs. You didn't have to know how to build them, and more importantly, with the simplicity of everything, they're easier to work with than a gaming PC. Both of those former strengths of consoles are getting gradually deteriorated by the direction that consoles are going in. The simplicity isn't as much of a thing because consoles receive updates. They also have games that receive updates. You can also choose between physical media and digital download. So the sheer simplicity of put in the disc, turn on the power, and play the game is just no longer a thing. Consoles have been resembling gaming PCs more and more as things have evolved. And now it's getting to the point where the simplicity is going away because as we saw with the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, there were mid-run releases, so to speak, or mid-run upgrade boxes, so to speak, where maybe you started out with a PS4 and you eventually upgraded to a PS4 Pro. So now hardware upgrades, albeit in a proprietary manner with gotchas and stuff like that, are becoming a thing with playing games on consoles. And with some of the possible proprietary gotchas regarding SSDs and storage that are being discussed with regards to the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, from a simplicity standpoint, maybe some of that might still be a thing, but at the same time, the consoles are probably going to be more known for their proprietary gotchas, like, for example, paying extra to play online, or the proprietary nature of the hardware, or hardware upgrades and service that is no longer user serviceable or user repair friendly. And on the price sides of things, what I'm seeing with the consoles is that with the Nintendo Switch dominating the low end, as well as the encroaching tablets and smartphones being able to be used as gaming appliances of various sizes, with what's going on at the low end, consoles have had an identity crisis. They're being left with nowhere to go but up. And so I would not be surprised if both the new Xbox and the new PlayStation come out at a gaming PC type price that is closer to what a gaming PC would cost. But PC gaming has always been known for being more expensive, unless you do something like an OEM conversion where you can benefit from a major computer company's bulk discounts on hardware. It's often the case that PC gaming is more expensive in terms of building the hardware that gives you the experience that you want. But in terms of price, consoles only need to stay cheaper than most gaming PCs in order to retain some kind of price advantage. They don't have to be notably below gaming PCs in order to have a niche, particularly with the low end being gobbled up by the Nintendo Switch as well as tablets and smartphones in terms of gaming appliances. So with all of these changes, what does that do to the idea of building a console killer PC when previously you would have built one to deliver either better performance than the consoles without spending as much to build a really good gaming rig, or you would build something that would deliver similar performance to the consoles at a lower price? Fundamentally, even without all these changes that are currently taking place in the console world, I don't think anybody was really building a console killer PC without either half-assing it or sticking to it, but only just to brag to their friends on YouTube or make YouTube videos about building console killer PCs. Because fundamentally, the idea is problematic. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about the other type of console killer that I've been keeping an eye on for the last couple of years, and that is the Ryzen APUs, beginning with the release of Raven Ridge. Well, I've kept an eye on the gaming performance as various YouTube channels have tested games with Ryzens going up to the 2400G and the 2400GE and stuff like that. And I'm just not impressed. And I'm starting to wonder if AMD is sandbagging here, where they will never release an APU with any decent amount of built-in gaming punch, similar to what they make for the console manufacturers, because it would cannibalize their sales of Radeon graphics cards if they made the systems on a chip a little too good. That's something that I'm wondering about. I mean, Intel is actually working on some system-on-a-chip type processors as well, but I have to wonder about these companies because when Intel gets into the business of making graphics cards, they'll be in the same boat. But if you make both processors and graphics cards, what do you do to your processor lineup if you want to build something useful for a system on a chip in order to not have it eat into your sales for your graphics cards? That's something something that I think we're going to have to think about. So as much as I would love to say that someday we'll see Ryzen laptops that are basically consoles, I got a feeling with what I've been seeing from the results from the tests that whatever you can get in terms of a console killer laptop is probably going to be on par with the previous generation of hardware. So Fortnite on low mode or something along those lines in order to get 60 frames per second, because I just don't see these hardware manufacturers going out of their way to make a system on a chip that could make maybe an entire section of their current graphics card lineup not worth purchasing. So it'd be nice if we could have something like that and build like a niche product like, haha, look at my little net top that plays video games. But I think that would be a rather small percentage of sales versus what they're making for the console manufacturers these days. Now let's talk about the problematic nature of console killer PCs. No more laptops. Let's talk about something you would build, like something you would put inside this Silverstone box, or better yet, maybe even something smaller that you would put inside something like the Silverstone Milo, or whatever other HTPC console killer PC cases happen to be on the market these days. Because you never know how far in the future people are going to listen to these podcasts with how YouTube works these days. So I definitely am going to keep an open mind in that respect. But here's the thing. If you build a console killer PC, you are deliberately sandbagging your gaming rig, and you're probably violating one of my core principles when it comes to buying stuff in the first place. Whenever you want something, or whenever you want to buy something, I should say, there's always three things that you can get: what you can afford, what you want, and what you need. Aside from future-proofing in various ways, like I recommend people have very beefy CPUs when they build gaming PCs so that the CPU, motherboard, and RAM can get them through multiple graphics cards over the life of the system. But other than future-proofing, a lot of times we probably want more than what we actually need, so if we buy what we want, we're probably spending too much money. On the other extreme, if we buy what we can afford instead of what we need, we're setting ourselves up for an incremental purchase, because you're getting something that doesn't do what you need it to do, so you're going to hit those boundaries, and then you're going to eventually try to save the money and go shopping for what you should have gotten in the first place, and now you've got hardware to figure out what to do with. Do you sell it? Blah, blah, blah. And who would you sell it to when you have to tell your potential customers, yeah, I didn't buy what I needed last time, so this system's actually crappier than what I actually need, but please buy it. I'd like to recoup as much of that money as I can. Haha, fat chance on that one. So the best thing to do is to figure out what it is that you need. Like look at, for example, the resolution you want to play at. Do you want to play 1080? Do you want to play 1440? Or do you want to try 4K? But as of this recording, 4K is still an emerging technology, so I'm betting even the consoles that are going to be bragging about, you could play at 4K! Woohoo! I'll bet any money the consoles that have 4K support are going to have it with the equivalent of low or medium settings for the games that they're running, which is going to be harder to keep an eye on because things are more locked down in the console world. So it's not like, for example, low, medium, high, ultra with PC gaming, unless that's becoming a thing now. Who knows? I mean, I know with PS4 versus PS4 Pro and the boost patch to do 60 frames per second and other stuff like that, it was a lot more locked down and proprietary, but 4K, it takes some serious horsepower to do 4K 60 with high graphical details, so we're still waiting for the technology to catch up on that one. As of this recording, I've even seen Linus Tech Tips do a skeptical video about how 4K gaming still isn't worth it yet. So you're probably looking at maybe maxing out the graphics at 1080 or 1440, and there's also the laws of physics to contend with here in terms of your screen size and how far away you sit from it. So if you're looking to play games in an environment where you're not hunching up towards the screen, it may be worth it to still stay at 1080 or 1440. Myself, I'm staying at 1080 for the foreseeable future because I still haven't run my 1080 TV from 2008 into the ground as of yet. So I realize I could go out tomorrow, spend a few hundred on a 4K panel, but I'm questioning whether I want to even do this TV thing again, because when I got my Samsung, it was comparable to a gaming monitor at the time. But since then, with the graphics stuff that TVs can do and smart apps and stuff, TVs have to have gaming mode and stuff nowadays in order to not be too slow to play more high-intensity games on. So I'm actually wondering what I would use for a display if I even want to go the TV route again, especially if I can get away with like 1 or 2 HDMI ins or whatever, receiving input from a system that I use as my source switch between the consoles and the PCs. But fundamentally, if you're just building a console killer, if you stick rigidly to that idea, you're probably not going to build what you need. You're probably not going to build something that does 1080-60 maxed out or 1440-60 maxed out or 1440-244 maxed out if you have like a 244 hertz gaming monitor, something with a higher refresh rate that you might want to, max out the graphics and run at that frame rate all the time. We haven't yet seen what the PS5 and the Xbox Series X are going to be doing, but with what's currently out there with the PS4, the PS4 Pro, and the Xbox One and Xbox One X, I mean, we're talking like sub 1080p and 30 frames per second when those machines first hit the scene. So it doesn't take much to build something that can trounce those pieces of hardware. But would you really want to do that in today's day and age, especially when you know that something like the Xbox One X is out there that can do 1080-60 or 4K 30? Or, the new consoles are coming out that might have even more horsepower under the hood. Why would you want to do just enough to beat out the consoles if there's a way for you to get something that's robust and is going to be a far greater return on investment for longer than many of these consoles are? I mean, there's a lot of really nice Ryzen processors out there that I could get, but I'm still not running out of CPU on the Skylake from 2016 yet. I could probably get some more CPU intensive games, especially at 1080p. That tends to tax the CPU more because the graphics cards are a little bit past 1080 these days. Then again, I am running a GTX 1060. The other thing to consider, of course, is power efficiency. If you want something that's power efficient and you don't have all this horsepower that you're not using, generating extra electricity costs, extra heat, things like that, and of course extra noise, because if you generate extra heat, you need extra fans to keep your processor from overheating. That's one of the issues in play and why I went for a hippie computer with Monolith. My objective was a computer that had the muscle to play 1080-60 on higher ultra settings, but if I wasn't playing those big games, it would drop way the heck down to not be a waste of power versus something like a laptop or a tablet. Monolith sinks down to laptop territory, but the Delosaurus does that even better. So it's not like the olden days where, oh boy, my Tuxedo, for example, wouldn't go below 100 watts unless you really, really tried. And even then it would sink down to maybe 80. But I think since then, processor manufacturers have realized that computers cannot be the diesel trucks of computing appliances, always having the horsepower but using a little too much energy to do mundane tasks like surf the web and stuff along those lines. The other thing to consider is that as consoles try to shed their reputation as being cheap gaming appliances, especially with the Nintendo Switch doing as well as it's doing at its current hardware level, so they're kind of being forced up the chain to between the Switch and the gaming PCs. The other thing to consider is, with how consoles cater to people that aren't as tech savvy and maybe get them with a few extra gotchas that make more money for Microsoft and Sony, what if somebody buying a new console suddenly ends up with a machine that is too powerful for their current setup? Like if they're still playing on a 1080 TV or something like that. They haven't gone to 4K yet, so they don't really have much use for 4K, or they'd be better served at 1080 or 1440 with higher graphics settings and a higher refresh rate. That's still on the table as 4K continues to try and carve out its niche among everything. So, especially if you spent all that time building a 1080 Blu-ray collection, and now what? You want to go buy your movies all over again for a 4K TV? Can you even see the difference in TVs when you watch movies yet? Or are you too far away from the screen? Do you have a screen that's big enough that the extra detail is worth it? I realized last time consoles were a little too weak and people were making fun of the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 when they first came out because they didn't make enough progress in order to be more competitive with gaming PCs. But what if the OEMs go in the other direction and an Xbox Series X might be a little too powerful for some people's setups and stuff? That really kind of destroys the whole idea of a console killer, if even a console killer could end up as something overkill, like if you don't have a 4K TV yet. Fundamentally, though, the idea of a console killer PC is really the sort of thing that you want to just do because you can and then brag on YouTube about it. But I don't think anybody really wants to build a console killer when they go to build one. I think they want to build a gaming PC that does what they want, even if it's got more robust hardware than what the consoles can deliver. Console killer is really kind of academic in terms of computer projects these days, and I think really what most gamers will do is eventually just start half-assing it and getting away from what a console killer is supposed to be. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure some others out there would agree with me, probably the closest I will come to a console killer PC is if I take one of my systems and turn it horizontal in a case like the Silverstone Grandia or the Silverstone Milo. Like if I want a horizontal computer so it fits better in a shelving system alongside the AV receiver and whatever consoles that I have, instead of being the only vertical thing that I have when everything else is horizontal. Plus with Monolith, you're talking 140 millimeter fans. You're talking a very quiet system in a case that was made to be quiet. And you're talking temperatures on the graphics and the processor that are kept very well under control, even during the summer months. And oftentimes during the colder parts of the year, I turn the fans all the way down so they run at like 500 to 800 RPM or something like that. So cooling isn't really an issue. I might be able to get away with building a small horizontal box with the kinds of systems that I build. I don't do wild and crazy overclocking. I'm not running multiple graphics cards, and I erred on the side of the greener graphics card rather than the punchier graphics card when I built this system. The extra space for drives might be a justification in terms of what I have where, but I'm actually tossing around the idea of transitioning to more network-attached drives for backing up data. Most of what I have the extra drives in my system for is to back up data with. So and especially with the transition from 3.5 inch to 2.5 inch, I'm not so sure that having a box that has lots of extra drives to back up data on anymore, or for lots of extra space, is really anything that's needed anymore, when I could have network-based stuff that all of my computers can back stuff up to and pull data off of and stuff like that. But that's another discussion entirely. The bottom line in this matter is that the idea of a console killer just flies in the face of what I like to do with gaming PCs, and that is build systems for the long haul. I initially built Tuxedo in 2010, and had it been a Sandy Bridge system instead of a 1090T, it probably would have lasted a lot longer than it did as an AMD system where I flaked out the motherboard from too much overclocking after X amount of years. But the other thing that bugged me, besides the instability from some of the overclocking that I was doing, was the power inefficiency of the Phenom platform at the time versus what Intel eventually did. But this Skylake system that I'm rolling with nowadays is still pretty much a 2016 system, and it still shows no signs of any of the games that I'm playing really taxing the processor to its limit. And that's what matters, because if the graphics card falls behind on things, I'll just upgrade the graphics card. And because I went extra beefy on the processor when I built this system, it'll just go that much longer with multiple graphics cards before I move on to whatever is next. Probably a Ryzen something or something along those lines, but we'll see what happens. But as it stands right now, I am absolutely not slamming the heck out of the CPU. It would take something like live streaming or something like that where more multi-core stuff was necessary before I'd even think about that kind of stuff. But the closest I will do to a console killer PC is just take my system and turn it horizontal through a form factor case like the Silverstone Grandia that we're looking at. I don't think the idea of a console killer PC really has much, if any, kind of future, because clearly, with what's going on in console land right now, the console manufacturers aren't taking what has happened with PCMR and whatnot sitting down. Especially with what Nintendo has done with the Switch and what mobile is going to do as it gobbles up more and more of the low end in the years to come. But that is a completely different discussion altogether. Thanks for listening, everybody. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.